You know that moment when you're scrolling through your phone at 2 a.m., maybe looking at real estate in your area, and you see a house listed for $1.2 million. And your first thought isn't, wow, that's expensive. Your first thought is, that's it? That's all $1 million gets you? It's this weird cognitive dissonance where $1 million somehow feels like both an impossible amount of money and not nearly enough money at the same time. Like when you were a kid, being a millionaire meant you were rich beyond imagination. You had made it. You were set for life. But somewhere along the way, that number started feeling ordinary, maybe even inadequate. My name is Kevin, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, human psychology, and why some people seem to effortlessly build wealth while others work their entire lives and have nothing to show for it. If you've ever wondered why that 7-figure milestone feels so elusive for most people, or more importantly, what separates those who reach it from those who don't, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps you see wealth building differently. Now, before we dive into why most people will never hit $1 million, let me paint you a picture that might make you uncomfortable. There are people in your neighborhood, maybe even people you know personally, who make less money than you do, drive older cars than you do, live in smaller houses than you do, but who are quietly worth more than 7 figures. Meanwhile, there are people making 6-figure salaries, driving brand new trucks, living in beautiful homes, who have a net worth of basically zero, or worse, negative net worth when you factor in all their debts. This isn't about luck or secret investment strategies or inheriting money from wealthy relatives. It's about something much more fundamental. And understanding this difference isn't just intellectually interesting. It's the key to figuring out which category you're going to end up in. Here's something that's going to sound counterintuitive, but stick with me. Most people think that becoming a millionaire is primarily about making more money. Like if you could just get that promotion, or switch to a higher-paying career, or start that side business, then you'd finally be able to build some real wealth. This makes intuitive sense, right? More income equals more money to save and invest. But here's where it gets interesting. And by interesting, I mean completely backwards from what you'd expect. Some of the highest earners I know are living paycheck to paycheck, just like people making a third of their salary. The doctor making $300,000 a year who has $50,000 in credit card debt and no retirement savings. The lawyer pulling in $200,000 annually but can't afford to take a vacation because all their money goes to their mortgage, car payments, and keeping up with their lifestyle. Meanwhile, I know a teacher making $45,000 who's on track to retire as a millionaire because she started investing early and never inflated her lifestyle. The real differentiator isn't how much money you make, it's becoming the type of person who keeps money. And that's a completely different skill set that has nothing to do with your career or your earning potential. It's about developing the psychological framework and daily habits that allow wealth to accumulate instead of just passing through your bank account on its way to someone else. This brings us to probably the biggest wealth killer that nobody talks about openly, even though everyone experiences it. It's this thing called lifestyle inflation, but that term makes it sound like some abstract economic concept when it's actually one of the most insidious psychological traps in personal finance. Here's how it works, and I guarantee you've seen this play out in your own life. You get a raise or a new job that pays more money. Maybe it's an extra $500 a month, maybe it's $2,000. And your immediate thought is, finally, now I can start saving some real money. You have these grand plans about how this extra income is going to transform your financial situation. You're going to max out your 401k, build a substantial emergency fund, maybe even start investing in a taxable account. But then life happens. You realize you can finally afford that nicer apartment you've been looking at. Or maybe you upgrade your car because your current one is getting a bit long in the tooth, and you can afford the payments now. You start eating out more often because you don't have to stress about every restaurant bill. You buy higher quality clothes, take better vacations, upgrade your phone plan, subscribe to a few more streaming services. None of these decisions feel extravagant in isolation. They all feel reasonable and justified. And 6 months later, you look at your bank account and realize that despite making significantly more money, you're saving exactly the same amount as before, or sometimes even less, because higher income often comes with higher taxes and additional expenses you didn't anticipate. Your expenses expanded to perfectly match your income, like some sort of financial gas that fills whatever container you put it in. The really insidious part is that these lifestyle upgrades don't feel optional anymore. That nicer apartment isn't a luxury, it's just your home. The better car isn't an indulgence, it's reliable transportation. The restaurant meals aren't treats, they're just dinner. You've locked in a higher cost of living without building any wealth, and now you're trapped at a new, higher level of financial stress. But even if someone manages to avoid lifestyle inflation, there's another factor working against them that most people completely underestimate. And it's probably the most ruthless enemy of wealth building, because it's invisible and irreversible. I'm talking about time, but not in the way you might think. Most people in their 20s and 30s operate under this assumption that they have unlimited time to build wealth. Like they'll start getting serious about investing and saving when they're 35 or 40, or when their kids are out of college, or when their mortgage is paid off. There's always some future version of themselves that's going to be more financially responsible and have more money available to save. What they don't realize is that compound interest isn't just about the math of returns growing over time. It's about time literally creating money out of thin air through exponential growth. And the difference between starting early and starting late isn't linear, it's exponential. Let me give you some numbers that might make you want to immediately open an investment account. If someone starts investing $500 a month at age 25 and earns an average return of 8% annually, by age 65 they'll have about $1.7 million. That same person making the exact same monthly contributions with the same rate of return, but starting at age 35 instead of 25, will have about $750,000 at retirement. Same effort, same sacrifice, same investment strategy. But starting 10 years later cost them nearly $1 million in final wealth. And here's the part that really hurts. The person who started at 25 only contributed $240,000 of their own money over those 40 years. The other $1.46 million came from compound growth. The person who started at 35 contributed $180,000 over 30 years, and only $570,000 came from growth. Time didn't just give the early starter more money, it gave them access to exponentially more free money generated by compound interest. This is why wealthy people talk about time being their most valuable asset. Not because time is money in some abstract sense, but because time literally manufactures wealth through compounding. And you can't buy time. You can't work overtime to get more time. Once those early investing years are gone, they're gone forever, and no amount of money can compensate for lost time in the wealth-building equation. Now let's talk about something that's going to completely reframe how you think about that $1 million milestone. Because here's what most people don't realize when they set become a millionaire as their financial goal. They have no idea what $1 million actually buys in terms of lifestyle and financial security. And the answer might be a lot less than you think. There's this rule in financial planning called the 4% rule, which is based on decades of research about safe withdrawal rates from retirement portfolios. The basic idea is that you can withdraw 4% of your portfolio value annually in retirement without running out of money, assuming a diversified investment portfolio and normal market conditions. Some financial advisors are now being more conservative and recommending 3% or 3.5%, but let's stick with 4% for this example. Here's the math that changes everything. If you retire with $1 million portfolio and follow the 4% rule, that gives you $40,000 per year in retirement income before taxes. If you're living in a state with income tax, you're looking at maybe $35,000 in actual spending money. That's less than $3,000 per month to cover all your living expenses. Housing, food, healthcare, transportation, entertainment, everything. Now, $3,000 a month isn't poverty, but it's also not exactly the luxurious retirement that most people envision when they think about being a millionaire. Depending on where you live and what kind of lifestyle you want to maintain in retirement, you might need significantly more than that. If you want to maintain a $60,000 annual lifestyle in retirement, you'd need $1.5 million saved using the 4% rule. For an $80,000 lifestyle, you'd need $2 million. This is what financial advisors call the 25x rule. You need 25 times your annual expenses saved to retire comfortably using the 4% withdrawal rate. So if you spend $60,000 per year now, you need $1.5 million to maintain that lifestyle in retirement. If you spend $80,000 annually, you need $2 million. Most people are aiming for way too little money because they're thinking about round numbers instead of the actual math of retirement income. The really sobering part is that most Americans spend more than $40,000 per year. The median household expenditure is closer to $70,000 annually, which means the average person actually needs $1.75 million to retire comfortably, not $1 million. And that's assuming they own their home outright and have no debt payments in retirement. But here's something that derails more people from reaching any significant wealth milestone than almost anything else. And it's something that sounds completely unrelated to building wealth. Most people never build a proper emergency fund, and they don't realize that this single oversight prevents them from ever making meaningful progress toward long-term financial goals. On the surface, emergency funds seem like they have nothing to do with building wealth. You're just letting money sit in a savings account earning basically nothing when you could be investing it and earning returns. It feels like you're being overly conservative and missing out on growth opportunities. A lot of financial influencers even argue that emergency funds are obsolete if you have access to credit cards or home equity lines of credit. But here's what actually happens when you try to build wealth without an emergency fund. And I've seen this pattern destroy people's financial progress over and over again. You start investing regularly, maybe $500 or $1,000 a month. You're feeling good about your discipline and watching your portfolio grow. Then life happens. Your car needs major repairs, or you have a medical expense, or your air conditioning dies in the middle of summer, or you lose your job. Without an emergency fund, you have two choices, both of which are terrible for wealth building. You can put the emergency expense on credit cards, which means you're now paying high interest rates while trying to invest for lower guaranteed returns. That's mathematically insane. Or you can sell your investments to cover the emergency, which locks in any losses and interrupts the compounding process. Most people end up doing both. They put some of the expense on credit cards and cash out some investments. Then they spend the next several months or even years trying to pay off the credit card debt and rebuild their investment portfolio instead of continuing to grow wealth consistently. An emergency fund isn't an expense or a drag on your wealth building. It's the foundation that makes consistent wealth building possible. It's what allows you to stay invested during market downturns, avoid credit card debt, and maintain your wealth building momentum regardless of what life throws at you. The person with 6 months of expenses saved in an emergency fund can weather almost any financial storm without touching their investments. The person without an emergency fund gets derailed by every minor crisis and spends their entire life starting over instead of building wealth. This brings us to another massive wealth killer that affects almost everyone, even people who understand the importance of investing. It's this tendency to endlessly research and optimize rather than actually starting to invest. And I get it, because investing feels risky and complicated, especially when you're dealing with your hard-earned money and you want to make sure you're making the right choices. People will spend months or even years researching the perfect investment strategy. Should they invest in individual stocks or index funds? What about bonds, real estate, cryptocurrency? What's the optimal asset allocation? Should they use a robo-advisor or pick investments themselves? They want to time the market perfectly, wait for a correction to buy in, or find some secret strategy that will give them better returns. Meanwhile, while they're researching and planning and waiting for the perfect moment, they're missing out on the most important factor in wealth building, which is time in the market. Here's some math that illustrates why perfect timing is way less important than consistent investing. Let's say someone spends 2 years researching investments while keeping their money in a savings account earning 0.5. Then they finally start investing $1,000 per month in a portfolio that averages 8% returns. Compare that to someone who immediately starts investing that same $1,000 monthly in a simple index fund earning 7% returns, which is lower than the first person's returns once they get started. After 30 years, the person who started immediately with the inferior 7% return strategy ends up with more money than the person who waited 2 years to start with the superior 8% return strategy. The cost of those 2 years of delay outweighs the benefit of the higher returns. Time in market beats timing the market, and it beats optimizing your returns. But there's a psychological component here that's even more important than the math. People who wait for the perfect investment strategy often never start investing at all. There's always one more article to read, one more podcast to listen to, one more strategy to research. Perfect becomes the enemy of good, and they end up with perfect knowledge and zero wealth. The people who build substantial wealth aren't necessarily the ones with the most sophisticated investment strategies. They're the ones who started investing consistently, even with imperfect knowledge, and stuck with it for decades. Consistency and time trump optimization and perfect timing every single time. But perhaps the biggest obstacle preventing most people from building wealth is something that's gotten exponentially worse in the age of social media. And it's this constant comparison to other people who appear to be living these amazingly successful and wealthy lifestyles. Instagram and TikTok are filled with people driving luxury cars, taking expensive vacations, living in beautiful homes, wearing designer clothes. It creates this sense that everyone else is doing better financially than you are. This comparison drives people to make financial decisions based on appearances rather than building actual wealth. They finance expensive cars to look successful. They take vacations they can't afford and put them on credit cards. They buy designer clothes and accessories to project an image of prosperity. They move to expensive apartments or buy houses at the top of their budget to keep up with what appears to be normal. But here's what social media doesn't show you, and it's the most important thing to understand about wealth building. Real wealth is almost completely invisible. The millionaire next door doesn't drive a flashy car or live in a mansion or wear expensive clothes. They drive a reliable used car, live in a modest home, shop at Target, and invest the difference. Their wealth exists in investment accounts and retirement funds that nobody can see on Instagram. Meanwhile, the people posting about their luxury lifestyles are often leveraged to the hilt with car payments, credit card debt, and mortgages that consume most of their income. They look wealthy, but their net worth might be zero or negative. They're spending money they don't have to appear successful to people they don't really know, and it's preventing them from building actual wealth. I know someone who makes about $85,000 a year, drives a 12-year-old Honda Civic, lives in a small apartment with a roommate, and has never posted a vacation photo on social media. He's also worth about $400,000 at age 32 and on track to retire as a multimillionaire. Nobody would look at his lifestyle and think wealthy, but he's building more real wealth than people making twice his salary who are focused on looking successful. The irony is that the behaviors that build wealth are the opposite of the behaviors that make you appear wealthy. Real wealth building requires living below your means, delaying gratification, and making boring financial decisions consistently over time. It's not photogenic, it's not exciting, and it definitely doesn't get likes on social media. Now let's talk about the psychological component of all this, because the math is actually pretty straightforward. Building wealth is simple, but it's not easy. The formulas are basic. Spend less than you earn, invest the difference in diversified portfolios, avoid debt, and give it time to compound. You could teach this to a middle schooler in about 10 minutes. So why do so few people actually do it? The answer lies in our relationship with money, which starts forming in childhood and affects every financial decision we make as adults. Most people grew up in households where money was a source of stress, where financial discussions were arguments, where there never seemed to be enough money for anything important. This creates deep psychological patterns that sabotage wealth building even when people intellectually understand what they should be doing. If you grew up hearing money doesn't grow on trees, and we can't afford that, you might develop a scarcity mindset where spending money feels safer than investing it. Money in your checking account feels real and secure. Money invested in the stock market feels risky and abstract. So you end up keeping too much in savings and not enough invested for growth. Or maybe you grew up in a household where money was used to show love and affection. Gifts, expensive dinners, lavish vacations. This can create an association between spending money and feeling good about yourself. Saving money feels like deprivation, while spending money feels like self-care. Building wealth requires breaking that emotional connection and finding other ways to meet those psychological needs. Some people develop the belief that wanting money is greedy or shallow. They feel guilty about focusing on wealth building because it seems materialistic. So they avoid thinking about money altogether and end up financially stressed because they never developed a plan. They confuse being good with money with being obsessed with money. These psychological patterns are incredibly powerful because they operate mostly below conscious awareness. You make financial decisions that feel right emotionally, even when they contradict your logical financial goals. Breaking these patterns requires recognizing them first, then gradually rewiring your emotional relationship with money through consistent positive experiences with wealth-building behaviors. Here's something that might surprise you about people who successfully build substantial wealth. They don't typically have dramatically different incomes than people who never build wealth. In fact, many millionaires are people you'd never suspect. They're teachers, government employees, small business owners, middle managers, regular people with regular jobs who made consistent financial decisions over long periods of time. The difference isn't their earning power, it's their relationship with time and delayed gratification. They understood early on that wealth building is about trading current consumption for future freedom. Every dollar you don't spend today can turn into several dollars in the future through compound growth. Every dollar you do spend today is gone forever, along with all the growth it could have generated. This time preference is probably the most reliable predictor of wealth-building success. People who can delay gratification, who can live below their means while their income is growing, who can resist lifestyle inflation and social pressure to spend money they don't have. These people build wealth almost automatically, even with modest incomes. But here's where it gets really interesting. Building wealth actually gets easier over time, not harder. The first $10,000 requires significant sacrifice and discipline. You have to change spending habits, track every expense, and say no to things you want. It feels difficult because you're fighting against established patterns and social expectations. But once you have $10,000 saved and invested, that money starts working for you. An 8% return on $10,000 is $800 per year. Not life-changing, but noticeable. When you reach $50,000, that same 8% return generates $4,000 annually. When you hit $100,000, you're earning $8,000 per year from your investments. By the time you have $500,000 invested, your money is generating $40,000 annually in growth, which might be more than you're contributing from your salary. This is why wealthy people talk about money working for them instead of them working for money. Once you accumulate enough invested assets, the investment returns start doing most of the heavy lifting in building wealth. Your job becomes maintaining the system and staying consistent rather than funding the entire wealth-building process through earned income. The path to $1 million isn't mysterious or complicated. It's just longer and more psychologically challenging than most people expect. You have to become comfortable with delayed gratification. You have to resist social pressure to appear wealthy before you actually are, and you have to maintain consistency even when progress feels slow. Most importantly, you have to understand that building wealth is about becoming a different type of person, not just accumulating money. You become someone who thinks long-term instead of short-term, someone who values financial security over appearances, someone who can distinguish between what you want now and what you want most. These identity shifts affect every area of your life and create a foundation for wealth building that goes far beyond just following a budget or investment strategy. The people who never hit $1 million aren't missing some secret information or investment opportunity. They're missing the psychological framework and daily habits that make wealth building inevitable. They're focused on looking successful instead of being successful. They're optimizing for short-term gratification instead of long-term wealth. They're trying to time markets instead of giving time to markets. But here's the encouraging part of all this. If you understand these patterns and psychological traps, you can avoid them. If you can develop the identity and habits of someone who builds wealth, the actual tactics and strategies are straightforward. Start investing consistently, live below your means, avoid debt, and give compound interest time to work. It's not exciting, it's not complicated, and it definitely won't get you any social media followers. But it works, and it's available to anyone willing to prioritize their future wealth over their current image. The $1 million milestone isn't just about the money, it's about proving to yourself that you can set a long-term goal and achieve it through consistent daily actions. It's about developing the financial discipline and emotional intelligence that creates security and options in your life. And most importantly, it's about becoming the type of person who has money instead of the type of person who money has. That transformation is worth far more than any number in your bank account.